All right. Good day, everybody. We are back for another episode of Chairmen of the Boards. The trio is back together, which always makes me feel pretty good at the top of an episode. Mason, myself, Grant, and Brian. And we have an interesting article to talk about today. 20 ways to get more out of your pedals. And the thing I like about this one, especially, is a lot of this stuff you don't have to purchase anything to do. It's a lot of, have you ever heard of this? Have you ever taken this approach to trying out the different sounds or signal chains, whatever it is, with the existing gear you already own? And I know a lot of us are trying to curb that inner voice that says, do you really need a 7th overdrive? Normally the answer is yes, but today we're going to try and say no. We are going to say no to 7 overdrives, and we're going to get into this article. Brian and Mason, how are you guys in the world of tone today? Any quick little updates for those that are listening?
I'm good. As you can tell, I'm in Rack City right now.
How many
rigs.
You got today?
I have 3 different racks and 3 more fly racks on the way. So it is really racking up in here.
There you go. How many racks does one guy need?
I like racks.
Oh, we should mention these are for customers. These aren't just your own. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, these are customers. I like big racks.
And how are the guitars sounding in Oakland today, Mason?
All is well here. Thank you. And anxious to dive in to see if these are less objectionable than some of the articles of the past. I'm hopeful that we're going to have some good recommendations today.
Yeah. This is from guitarworld.com. The article in its entirety will be linked in the show notes. And there's quite a few points. There's give or take 20 if the title holds true. 20 different points. So we won't hit all of them today, but we will go through the ones that stand out. Let's say the first one, number 1, 20 ways to get more out of your pedals. The article goes on to say, don't overlook mainstream pedals. And basically the idea of this point is there has been such a rise, probably in the last 10 to 15 years, of boutique pedal builders. Very small companies that have their own unique take on common effects and common ways of building and laying out pedals, that the mainstream builders, the MXRs, the Dunlops, maybe now we could include Strymon in this as well. All these big builders are kind of being forgotten about because they aren't as cool and hip, and you can't say, did you hear about the Strymon timeline? It'll change. Like, everyone's heard of these things, so they aren't as special and unique. But I really like this point because I think there are a lot of pedals that are not sexy. Everyone knows what they are or heard of them. They're easy to come by. And a lot of these mainstream pedals, although they might not have the cool factor or might not be as boutique, serve a great purpose. And I'll get you guys to maybe think of one of your favorites. But my favorite being the classic Ibanez or Ibanez TS9. And I just never get sick of this pedal. I have one. It ends up on every board I build because I've tried moving away. I just cannot. And I'm just a big fan of it. Everyone, if you have bought a pedal, you've come across a TS9. It's about as ubiquitous as you can get. But I'm always looking for people to disagree here. How do you guys feel about don't leave out the mainstream, the big players in the pedal markets? How does it sit with you?
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think there are a lot of pedals out there that people will just be like, I'm not going to use that because, it's a staple pedal that everyone uses. I think there's a good reason why that a lot of people use it. Have I bought 9 or 10 different timelines in my expand of it being out? Yes, I have, because it's a great pedal. But, there's other stuff out there that's also great. I just think that attitude of like, I'm not going to buy it because of this, like, because everyone else has it, kind of is a dumb reason. Because there's a reason why it's so popular. Like the DL4. Like, everyone had a DL4. I never had a DL4 just because it just wasn't appealing to me. I had the Nova
You would
delay
have
at the
if you were
time.
10 years younger.
Yeah, I
Older?
guess so. Oh, 10 years older or younger?
Or sorry, 10 years older.
Okay, 10 years older. Yeah. So if I was 42, yeah, no, it definitely, yeah, no. So I think, at that time, it was just something I wasn't interested in, not because everyone else had, just because I wasn't. But yeah, I hear it all the time. I'll be like, oh, hey, I want a new delay. I'm like, hey, have you looked at the timeline? They're like, I don't want that because everyone has it. I'm like, okay, well, that's not a very valid reason. But yeah, I agree. Definitely don't leave out mainstream pedals because some of them are really great.
I'm also in agreement. I'm looking at a few of my rigs here, and I have Ibanez pedals featured. I also have some Boss pedals features, including one of them that they say here, the Boss TR2. I have
Love it.
one of them is a Keeley
Tremolo?
modified one, and one of them is an Exactone modified one. I also have a Boss Vibrato VB2 on one of the rigs. I have MXR Dynacomps or I guess I have a Dynacomp on one rig. But it is sort of an interesting thing. I was thinking as you were saying about not to overlook mainstream pedals. The line, I think, in the last 10 years or so has kind of been blurred between sort of the boutique and mainstream, where the boutique pedals, maybe in size and in name, operate somewhat boutique, but the manufacturing is really no different than how the large companies do it, because most boutique companies realized that there was value in the way that the MXRs of the world or the Bosses of the world were making their pedals, doing their layouts, kind of standardizing, using surface mount, and that there was a certain predictability and consistency in those forms of manufacturing, and understanding that there are huge limitations in doing hand wiring or partial hand wiring. And so it's kind of an interesting thing where the pedal build, or the way that pedals are manufactured at the highest level, is really not that different. And a lot of those legacy companies like Boss have actually been doing a very consistent and quality job at that for a really long time. And now the boutique companies sort of took the scenic route to come to the same conclusion. And so it's really more of like the distinguishing factors of boutique are more just like size of the company and maybe like the branding. In terms of like what's inside, there's not a whole lot of like fundamental differences in terms of how they choose to do layout, thicknesses of PCB, the parts they choose. They're their own designs, obviously. I'm not saying that they're the same, but I'm saying the approach to manufacturing is much more similar than it had ever been. It's sort of an interesting aside there.
Which is another whole thing we've chatted about. It's been a while since we talked about, but the difference between pick and place or a surface mount layout versus a through hole. And 20 years ago, you open up most pedals and you would be seeing a lot of through hole components. And nowadays, it looks like a computer circuit board. If you kind of open it up, you see all sorts of tiny little parts that have been placed and soldered with some type of computer programming. Even the oven that the parts are heated up to is all pre-programmed for that board. And so it's, that is a very good point. I wouldn't have brought that up. I wouldn't have thought of that. One other one that popped into my head that, again, with some of these larger companies, you get some very affordable pedals. And one that we had talked about in a previous article, favorite overdrives and all this, one of mine that is very easy to come by and very cheap is the EHX Soul Food. And it's like a $60, $70 pedal. Sounds awesome, looks okay, and it's just a standard EHX pedal. And you'd probably judge it harsher than it deserves if you were to just look at it and be like, it's, whatever. But you plug it in, close your eyes, like it sounds like a Klon. It sounds great. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of those pedals out there to be had. So I think it's pretty cool. The next point I won't spend much time on, it's find your tribe. Basically the idea here being that let's take Strymon, because Brian, I'm sure you've done the same, and Mason as well, where you have a customer, they want a board built, And 80%, if not more, of their pedals are from Strymon. They have overdrives from Strymon. They have the Mobius, the Timeline, the Big Sky. They have all these Strymon, or Chase Bliss is another one that you'll see this with as well. Obviously, Boss, there's a whole group of people that just build pedal boards out of Boss pedals, and that's all you're allowed to use. And so finding your tribe, the idea being that you find, let's say you like the Strymon Timeline, a delay from one company. Chances are, if you connect with that, you are also going to connect with their reverb, and you're also going to connect with their modulation. There's a good chance of it. And so find your tribe is basically just making a point of that, and how, try, if you like one manufacturer, one company, diversify within their pedal range and see what else you connect with. But the next point is one I wanted to focus on. Point number 3 is revisit old pedals, ones that maybe you didn't like. For me, that would be a Blues Breaker or a King of Tone is coming to mind. Revisit old pedals that maybe you didn't connect with as much when you change your amp. So you go from, in this example, a Marshall to a Fender Deluxe, 2 very different amps. The pedals are going to sound quite different because you've just changed the amplifier at the end of your chain. Now, Mason, I think you have the most experience here. What would you say about this point? Is it blasphemy, or are they on the right track here?
I think that this is an important point, because overdrives will react certain ways, or at least the way that we set them may react a specific way in one circuit and dissimilar in another. So I think that this is a good point. And ordinarily when I build pedal boards, like even in my Nashville pedal board, which you can find a video of on our YouTube channel, on the Vertex YouTube channel, I think it has like 5 different overdrives on it, if I'm counting correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4,
We just
5.
lost 10% of our listeners. They just left the episode. 5 overdrives.
5
but you
overdrives,
have a reason for all of them.
Right, so it has a King of Tone, a Nobles ODR1, a Greer Lightspeed, a MOSFET MT10, the Ibanez MT10, and a Rat. And when I built it, I was talking about how the Nashville approach for a lot of these studio musicians, and I kind of try to replicate a board that represented kind of what's commonly there, is that they have this many overdrives because they use so many different amps, and they need to be able to sort of cycle through a range of overdrives quickly and kind of see what's working best in the context of not only the song, but the amp choice that they've gone with for that song.
Yeah.
And they all react differently. And I found this to be, although I wouldn't ordinarily use that many overdrives on a pedal board, I found to be incredibly useful when I'm shooting videos here and I am using different amplifiers to kind of be like, all right, something that's more mid-scooped, like the Rat, seems to work really well with this particular amp. Or, so kind of the inverse, like really mid-range heavy stuff tends to work great with the Rat.
Yeah.
But stuff that has no mid-range, like the mid-60s Fenders, those tend to do great with Tube Screamers, where they add a lot of mid-range back in. And so there's these ways that things that people have sort of written off can work really great when they do shift to different amplifiers. And I think that this is a really valuable piece of advice, is to, and even in an evaluation of some pedals, like you'll see people that will review pedals on Sweetwater or these different places, and they'll sort of tear the pedal down on the merits that it just didn't work in their context. But there's no consideration that like every amplifier and every guitar is going to sort of bring a different sonic palette to the table, and things may not pair well, It's like, some pedals go together like lamb and tuna fish, to quote the great Rob Schneider.
And I think this is also a fair point as well, where you look at some of these studio greats, or like guys that tour all the time, always trying new gear, whatever it is. And it takes a long time to come up with a well-rounded opinion on different tones and how to get there. Because like for me, for example, I usually If I'm not thinking and I just want to plug in quickly, I plug into a Fender Twin. And certain pedals will sound great in that Twin. And certain guitars into certain pedals into the same amp will sound totally different if I swap out the guitar. And so there are, like, let's say you have a Vox, a Fender, and a Marshall, and you have 3 guitars to go with those 3 amps. You will find combinations that will only work, certain pedals that will only work really well or gel with you with your Strat into your Vox. And then you have your Les Paul into your Twin. And then maybe you have a PRS or something else that goes into your Marshall. And then you can swap all of those around to make a whole bunch of other different combinations. And then the pedals that go with those will probably also subtly change as you do that as well. That's not something that you can figure out in a day. Like, you are going to be doing these combinations over and over again for months or for years. And the limitations of your, let's say, tonal opinions, of which we all have, they will be limited by the time that you put into these combinations. And so that's where I'm guilty of this. I make sweeping judgments. One of them is I need to probably be blindfolded the next time I plug into a King of Tone, because I look at a King of Tones like, I know that I don't really gel with it. I know it's a great pedal. It's an awesome pedal, but I don't personally gel with it. But I have not done the work to try it out with all these different combinations. And so really all I can say,
Grant.
What's that?
Do the work.
Exactly. I need to do
Put
the
in
work.
the work.
But what I need to say is I don't like a King of Tone with a telly into a Vox. That's all I can really say, for my personal tastes. And but ironically, we've covered this on the show. If someone else were to play that exact same rig, King of Tone, Vox, and a telly, I would love it. I would fall in love with it, and I would just wonder why I couldn't get that same sound. So excuse me, I do think it's worth noting that this stuff takes a lot of time. And I think it's not something that you can just quickly rush into. Would you add anything to this, Brian, from your experience? Anything that you've kind of found in terms of changing out, let's say, the fundamentals, the amp or the guitar or both, and how it affects the pedals that you choose?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it does drastically. I mean, I have a tube amp. I don't use it for like playing on the weekends and stuff. But like switching between even amp sims. Like, I know that this one is like changing amps. Even with amp sims, they can all act and react differently. Like, they'll handle overdrives differently. Some overdrives will sound great. I mean, some overdrives sound better with my Duesenberg than they do with my White Falcon. So ironically enough, my White Falcon sits at home in my office more because my Duesenberg just does what I need it. Do I want to take both of them? Yeah, I'll take that White Falcon for certain occasions, but it just doesn't react the same way as another one does with this, this A amp or whatever that I'm using. So I think it definitely, if revisit some old pedals and changing amps and stuff, I definitely think that's true, because at least with the rig I'm running now, when I do use the Falcon, I can change the type of overdrive I'm using, particularly for that guitar. So like, that kind of stuff is really handy. You just got to find stuff that just caters really well. So yeah, I'm all for visiting, especially a lot of people have like shelves of pedals. Like, they have like just pedals sitting on shelves. Like, oh yeah, I have 30 overdrives I kind of pick from. I'm like, if I have one overdrive sitting on my shelf, I'm selling it if I'm not using it. Like, that's how I am. So if you have a shelf of pedals that you can test other stuff out, or when you're changing stuff, absolutely do it. I definitely think, just get creative and see what works and what doesn't, because those different pickups, which I have learned, make a drastic difference in how pedals respond and how they sound. So yeah,
Some people even keep clons in plastic buckets.
I've heard that too. Clear plastic buckets.
I'm never gonna live that down.
I just love it when we were at your house and I was like, oh, this is cool, and I'm like, this looks like a clon, and you're like, it is a clon. I was like, it is. Why is it in a?
It's premium plastic though, so I mean, can you
you can kind of see some of them,
I see
in frame right now.
Back there, there's you can see my Mac Mini box, and I think that there's
the clone of the computer world, right? Yeah.
There's an M9 in there.
I love it. No, I think it's great. I think it's great.
So
'cause it's a
basically,
pedal.
all that to say, for this point, don't judge a pedal on one rig combination
On
or
what
one
bucket
amp.
it's in.
Yeah, now what bucket is in? Get multiple buckets.
The next one, I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about here. Point 4. We were actually just talking a bit about this before we hit record today. Get a good pedal board. Now, my question here, and I'll throw it to Mason, I'll throw this to you first. How do you define what a good pedal board is? Or the flip side, what makes a bad pedal board? So if someone was to ask you, Mason, I want to get a good pedal board, what's going through your head?
Well, I would say the first thing is kind of the application and sort of where they are on the journey to Tone Town. Because I wouldn't say that the pedal train is a bad choice for somebody that likes to change pedals a lot, doesn't have a kind of a steady framework that they're always coming back to. It's unquestionable to me, the modularity of the pedal train format is great for people that can't make up their minds, because it is sort of designed to just swap things in and out quickly. The power supply is mounted underneath. It's always there, ready to go. And I think that has merit for a lot of people that, again, are going to be changing things out. They want to experiment. Those things are all great. That's not to say that you can't build a rig like any of us would build and make it modular. You can, but it's not really the reason that you would hire somebody like us. As far as what a pedal board, like a bad pedal board, I would really only say that something's bad if we know that the quality of the mechanical design is poor or is suboptimal comparatively. I won't name any names out of respect for the fact that these brands are businesses that have mouths to feed and employ a lot of people. But there are brands where mechanically there are known issues. I think they try to mask some of those issues. But if the branding is good and the aesthetic is nice, most people aren't going to have a clear understanding of why a pedal board is not great, and they will see something that they think looks cool or has different colors or is presented in such a way that makes it seem better than it is, and they don't really know that like there's issues where the pedal boards flex too much or they are locked into certain systems that those pedal boards have in order to, bring pedals in and out effectively. And then there's like tons of gimmicky stuff, like where you have to strap down the pedals with zip ties and stuff like that. And it's just kind of, I'm sure there's somebody that looks at that and they think that that's brilliant. And like, I'm not here to rain on their parade, but like you don't really see professional rigs using these sorts of kind of gimmicky devices. It's kind of like unsexy to say this, but most of the best rig builders in the world are pretty much following a similar template to like what was done 40 years ago. Like maybe they've improved, the surfaces are lighter and the way that you might be able to organize the pedals or have risers and stuff like that. Like maybe that's new. But we're mostly building on very similar templates that have been done in this way for a really long time. And the reason that is that it's easy to troubleshoot, it's easy to organize. And from the standpoint of like delivering it to a professional and knowing that they can use it night in and night out, and they can tech it themselves or tech it with their guitar tech and kind of know roughly the ins and outs of where everything goes, like we haven't evolved beyond that. And so like there's kind of a somewhat narrow style of build that occurs, and there's a certain type of pedal board or a range of pedal boards that kind of fall into that category. And I would say the newest of which is probably the pedal train style, and then there's just a lot of copycats of that style.
Yep.
So that's my point of view there.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the biggest thing is reliability, I think, when it comes to it. I like all the points that Mason said are great points. Like the gimmicky, like all this little stuff. When it comes down to it, it's the foundation of your pedal board. It's, when you're building, I've never built a house, but I have friends that have. When you're building your house, the foundation, like, at least here, it's a slab of concrete. Like, it is not cute. It's not perfect. It's not pretty. It's just the foundation. It's literally what you're building your house on, and it's supposed to be stable. So seeing other companies that come out with stuff, like, there are some cool ideas, cool systems, but I think years ago when I started at the Guitar Sanctuary, I had to compromise on building on platforms I was not comfortable building on, purely out of the fact that they're like, no, you have to build on it. We want to get this customer.
You ever have to do the bone?
No, the bone.
There's like a pedal board. I don't remember if what company it is. It might actually be Gator, which, I love those guys. But it's shaped like a dog bone.
Oh boy.
No, I mean
it's like narrow in the center, and then it has kind of these like,
oh my god,
bows at the end. Where
I
like,
assume for volume pedals.
works and,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my
it's called the bone.
That's
Beautiful.
hilarious. Well, no, I have never had.
You never got boned?
Never got boned. Never did. No, the craziest board I've ever set up though was on a cutting board for Mark Lettieri. He was like, "Listen, I know this doesn't seem normal, but it fits in my backpack, and I have to fly to Europe, and I don't want to have TSA screwing it up." So we, scratched down the surface a little bit, but Velcro.
Was it like bamboo or plastic?
It was plastic. It was a white plastic.
Did it smell like
board.
onions?
Luckily, it was clean. Luckily, he's like,
beautiful.
I just bought
Nicely
this.
done, Mark.
He's like, I bought it from Target. So I was like, okay.
He turns it over and he does his own. He has a little hot
Just
plate.
flip it over.
Save money on this tour.
He's just cutting up his chicken right there and making, So like that was, I would say, like, I've had people that are like, hey man, I got this really cool board. I just picked up from Amazon, and all you have to do is you can slide, you can, they have these clips and you slide it through a track and it locks down the pedal from the sides. And I'm like, that's really interesting, but
oh man,
like that kind of stuff. Like
I
don't know
the
who
rig
they
builder
are.
Aikido that you have to do to kind of slowly get them to like
Yes.
fall out and be like, wow, that's so great. But have you thought about
and
what
that's
about
the thing
scenario?
is I don't want to rain on people's parade. I want people to be happy with their setup and stuff. And that's why people would be like, oh, is it okay? I'm like, dude, this is your board. You tell me. Like I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna make it work. So like people, propose stuff to me, and I'll be like, I won't be like no, because I'm not a jerk. I'll just be like, that's a really cool idea. This is the process, that kind of stuff. And there were times that I had to compromise on some boards, and unfortunately, it came back to bite me in the butt on the type of stuff. Like it arrived damaged, or the pedals had fallen off of the type of system that pedal board had to use to mount them, like stuff like that. And it was just little stuff like, oh, hey, the patch panels fell off because the type of screws they used were short, or stuff like that. It was just like little stuff that was just like such a headache.
What do you tell people now, Brian, when they come to you and they say, hey, there's this amazing pedal board, I want to build on it, and you can strap them in with zip ties or
No. I had one guy tell me about magnets.
Or you could screw them in. You could screw them into this board. What do you say now?
I typically just tell him, I was like, man, it's a really cool idea. It's really cool, but the longevity of that setup, like, is it going to cater if you switch out stuff? How easy is it to fix if something is messed up? Just the flexibility of the board, like it doesn't, it's housing your pedals, obviously. So like it doesn't have to be like, I don't know, you don't have to. I'm trying to think of the term. I had a thought in my head, but it's like you just, it doesn't have to be the craziest thing to hold the pedals as long as it works. Like I think a good pedal board is when it's something that I like the flat boards because I can get it literally in any size. That's my biggest thing. And getting bridges that I can get customized to any size are really handy. And it just allows for less like, oh, you can't do that. Because when you start getting the companies that have like a mass produce, like Creation, they have their different series, 32 by 16, 28 by 14, 24 by 12, and have all these sizes. They're great boards. But sometimes you start getting people that are like they're like turning this one pedal this direction, a 45-degree angle just to fit it on the board, just to make it work. And I'm like, man, if you're having a compromise on like little stuff like that, like get a different board, get a bigger board, get something that's just going to work. So, I'm not all for all this like hinge bridge, flat board. That's pretty much like the go-to because I know I can bolt stuff through the board. I know I can bolt the bridge down. I know it's easy to get to. I know the case it fits in. But like when the bridge starts tipping back and the back row flips back and then you open up like, oh, the middle of my board opens up into this hidden compartment. I'm like, I don't care about that. Like in what world are you going to open that up to? Like, it's funny seeing people that have like, and I've done it 2 or 3 bridges on boards. Like they're really cool idea. It's just one of those things, just like when you start seeing that, like the boards that slide open and extend, like that kind of stuff. I think Dario did stuff like that. I'm like, just like from a practical standpoint, I'm like, sometimes it just doesn't work. I think the idea is cool, but just long term, like, no.
What do you do, Grant? What do you tell people when they come to you with like a weirdo board?
I like that term.
I think this is a valuable question, and I don't want my answer to come across as being arrogant because that's not my intent. But most of my customers come to me because of the experience I have, not because they want a clean board. The clean board is a nice
byproduct.
It's a byproduct. It's a plus. But they'll often, the thing I hear most is, hey, I was thinking about doing this. What do you think about that? And then if I think that it holds up for their goals for their board, then I'll tell them, I think that's actually a great idea. There's still some downsides to consider often. Even going with a flat board versus an angle, neither one is better than the other, but one will be better for a certain end result than the other will. So in different contexts, one is going to be better than the other. And so I'll often tell them that kind of line of thinking. So even if they wanted a board that I would consider quite gimmicky, but all of their end results lined up with that board being the best possible fit, which I, as a side note, I think is very rare to recommend a gimmicky board for that type of thing. But if it lined up for what they needed and the reasoning was all there and the logic was there, I mean, this is a good board for what you want. I would never use it, but for what you want, I think this is a good fit. And so that's where my biggest thing is trying not to rush to conclusions and make up my mind for their finished product. So I just ask a lot of questions. Why do you want that? Why is it that this stuck out more than the tried and true flat board? What is it? And if they give a convincing answer, then I think that's great. But again, I don't rush in. I try. I'll say that. I'm by no means am I perfect at this. I try not to rush to conclusions based on what I want for their pedal board because they're the ones that need to use it every day. And so that's where I think sometimes a board that is not for me is going to be perfect for them. I will say though, in saying all of that, 9 times out of 10, it's a flat board, it's a Vertex board, or it's an angled elevation board from Creation. 9 out of 10 boards, it ends up just being, because that, like after asking questions, and I'll tell them, this is why I think this might be something to consider. And then I walk them through and like, oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that's where
be able to have that right. You have to be able to have that the way to kind of get out of it though. There has to be kind of like that thing.
Yeah. And I'll let people know, especially in the early stages of a build, in like the consult planning type stage, I'll let them know, like, I don't think this is a good idea. This is why. But if you still want to do it, it's your board. But I'll usually even put it in writing in their file, like, did not recommend this board because of A, B, and C. Customer still wanted to go ahead. And so it's very clear. But I would say I can't even remember the last time that had to happen because most of the time.
You got to have your out.
What's that? Well, you got to just make it very clear. So then in 6 months, when they're using it, like, hey, this thing keeps falling off. It's like,
you remember
this is what we talked about. Yeah. And, like when you've been doing this type of thing for 15 years, by no means do I know it all. I'd say the more you know, the less you realize, the more you have to learn. And that would definitely be the case with me. But there's some of these like basics. And don't mess with a good thing. Like dual lock on a smooth metal surface works very well. And 99% of the time, that will be perfect for most people. And so that's where there's some of the basics that, you just don't really need to mess with. Although people always come up with ideas, companies come up with new product lines, and it's like, oh, did you see this new thing? And most of the time, it's not better than the original problem they were trying to fix. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. And so I think our job and the consumer's job is to figure out which ones are the ones worth pursuing and which ones, most of them, are the ones worth ignoring if it's a new, exciting, shiny thing. And that applies to everything we're talking about today. Most new shiny overdrives that promise the world are actually just a TS9 with a new paint job on it. And it's just marketing stuff. But every once in a while, there's something really cool that comes along, and that's where I think it's, again, something you can't just make rash judgments on or look into the specs and actually try the thing out and then make up your mind.
Don't get a rash making judgments.
And another thing to think about too, and I think a lot of people don't factor this in too, is like, how does it travel? How does it travel? If you travel, if you're shipping a board back and forth between me and him or Grant or whoever is doing the build, like, how is that going to hold up? Because I've had people, I've built boards with dual lock I've been using, not the same. I haven't been using this only roll for 12 years, but like having dual lock I've been using literally for 12 years, and like they get it in a pedal is dislodged, and you're like, oh, what the heck? And I'm like, man, things are going to happen in shipping. Some stuff can pop off. If you have seen a video from Grant or I in the past, we know that with some heavy hits, dual lock can pop off. I mean, there's plenty of pedals that can fall off. It's just like that stuff is not indestructible. And that's where like getting the right combination of like dual lock or the grip tape that Mason has used. Like, I stayed away from hook and loop, but Grant has a cool dual lock hook and loop, right? Like combination you've done in the past.
Yeah, it's very rarely used.
Very rarely, but you've done it before. So, but it's just like, it's one of those things like, how does it travel? So like having more moving parts to a board. It's like a bicycle. You got the wheels. Those are the main parts, and you got the gears. But when you start adding all these little accessories to the bicycle, it just makes it more things are prone to go wrong and get broken or fall off along the way. So the same thing applies to a board. Like, you could be like, oh, my module popped off, or this popped off, or I got this new add-on and that popped off. Like that happens all the time. So that's another.
I will say as well, this has been my experience at least, the bigger the board is, the more robust it needs to be, because it has a lot more inertia. So, if you're shipping a 32-inch pedal board or a 40-inch like a monster pedal board, the chances of that getting damaged in travel are much greater than if you have an 18-inch board. Mm-hmm. And so the bigger the board is, the more weight's behind it. So if it does fall on a corner, the more weight is going on that corner, the more likely it's going to crack or shear off or whatever it is. And so I would say almost all the boards I've had damaged in transit, which is not many, 3 or 4 in 15 years, they have all been big boards. Mm. And so if you're looking at a bigger board, don't go with something that has a ton of flex in it. Don't go with something that isn't robustly built. And if you're wondering what those, which boards we would recommend, we've already said a bunch of them on the show. We just recently did a top pedal board of 2025, 1 or 2 episodes ago. Listen to that and you'll get all the info you need. But I think, especially for bigger boards, this applies even more so. Before we move on, I want to throw to Brian to tell us about a few of the sponsors that make this podcast possible. So Brian, why don't you take it away and tell us about our sponsors?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first of our sponsors are going to be the guys over at the Guitar Sanctuary, who do have a lot of pedal boards in stock. They have pedal trains, some creation stuff, some Vertex boards. So they have them in stock, as well as a lot of the pedals that we're talking about. They have amps, guitars, acoustics, ukuleles. They have tons of options, as well as they have, if you live in the area, they have lessons for some instruments. They do not have drum lessons. They don't have drum stuff. So don't ask them about drum stuff. But anything else, reach out to them and they'd be happy to help at guitarsanctuary.com. Shoot them a text, give them a call, email them. They'd love to help you out. So check them out, guitarsanctuary.com. Next, we're going to be the guys over at Neural DSP with the Quad Cortex, the Nano Cortex, Core OS. They just did a recent Quad Cortex, they're doing an update for the Quad Cortex that's supposed to be coming out really soon with some more features. The Nano Cortex just got a nice little upgrade to a lot of the effects blocks that you could do, different types of delays, different types of reverbs, overdrives, capturing. So check them out. With the Quad Cortex, you can load their desktop plugins onto the Quad Cortex. Use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, to save 30% off all the plugins. I don't think they've released any new plugins that I'm aware of at this moment. So everything should qualify for that code. Save some money. You know, we all want to save a little bit of money. So 70% away from free, as Grant says. So use that code today. You won't be disappointed. Finally, we're going to be the guys over at BTPA, or best known as Bestronics, who we all talk about, Brad. I think people probably think that we're making this up, but we really do. I talk to Brad pretty often. He's a couple lists down on my contact list, and I'm always asking him for stuff. He's like, I got that part number, and I just ordered a bunch of audio stuff for these racks that I'm building and stuff, some panels and some cable snake looms, as we've talked about in the past. They do a lot of audio looms and stuff too. So he is the Steve Irwin of audio snake handling at BTPA. So go check them out at btpa.com. Use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, to save 10%. You won't be disappointed. They also have all sorts of little connectors and cables for DC power and audio cabling. So check them out and you won't be disappointed. I'll throw it back to you, Grant.
There we go. Awesome. Okay, so the next few points I'm happy to skip, but you guys just interrupt me if you have anything to say here. Number 5, don't rule out using delay straight into the amp. I'm happy to move on.
If you don't have gain from the amp.
That's it. If you're running a clean amp, you're not really going to be noticing much of a difference there. Try an always on boost. I'm also happy to keep moving, but if you guys have anything to say, the idea being most people don't like, or some people don't like playing into a glassy clean amp. The always on boost will help drive that amp a little bit further and give you more textures at your fingertips. I think it's great. I don't know if we need to stop and talk about it unless you guys want to add anything in there. And then
I would say the boost if you want to do that, it's better with a boost that's not that linear. So like, the Vertex boost doesn't really have any color, and it can clip the input of the amp, but usually you want something that has some EQ characteristics, because when you get the front end to clip, you may want to remove bass or add treble or do things to kind of help EQ it. So I would say for something like this, RC booster might be good, EP boost might be good. These are kind of things that have a color.
You could get fancy with a GE7 if you wanted to. Use that as a boost. Do that too. Tailor it to your own needs. Put fuzz pedals first most of the time. This is one we've talked about so often on the show about impedance sensitive pedals, ones that like to see your pickups. If you guys want to stop me, the next point is the one that I wanted to focus on.
Okay.
Try using modulation subtly. Now, I don't know where this guy gets the nerve to use the word subtle and modulation in the same sentence, but he did. I'm not going to totally disagree with him. I do think this is a good point. But when you have, in the photo of the article, there's a Boss CE2W, a chorus pedal. And whenever I plug that thing in, the mix level just kind of slowly goes higher and higher and higher, the depth. Mm-hmm. I just love the sound of these things. I can see where he's coming from. I definitely don't disagree. A little tongue-in-cheek, but modulation can be overused quite easily. But boy, does it sound good.
Are they saying subtly, like when you go to Olive Garden and they put the salad down and they like say when with the cheese and you just never say when? Is it like
that's
that?
Subtle.
Like
that's the definition.
Is it like the people that are animals that are like, oh, no cheese? And you're like, what is freaking wrong with you? No, put the cheese on. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was curious.
And like when I subtly eat my 8th breadstick at the Olive Garden.
Do you have them cheese your breadsticks, Brian?
Oh, I do it all. I'm like doing what's funny
your salad.
I ordered some the other day, not accidentally. There's no accident when you order an Olive Garden. But I ordered some extra breadsticks, but then I forgot that my wife had already ordered extra breadsticks. So we ended up with like 30 breadsticks, and I was just
Beautiful.
like,
Aren't they just free breadsticks?
no, well, when you're sitting down, they're free, but like when you order them to go and stuff, which because she's
Oh.
pregnant, she doesn't like the smells of inside the restaurant, so I bring it home. But so like all my neighbors, I was like, I got all these breadsticks, I can't eat them all, and they're like, well, take them. But yeah, no, I'm just not an animal.
All right.
No modulation. I've become
bless.
more of a fan of modulation. I was kind of like, yeah, I'm a reverb and delay.
I thought he was going to say Olive Garden.
How can you love Olive Garden any more than he already does? That's the question.
So much. No, it's, I mean, I describe pedalboard cabling as the Olive Garden spaghetti mess anyway. But no, I like, funny enough, is like tremolo, like the C, the DC, the Dimension C.
DC2W.
That is one of my favorite. That's like, I love that one a lot. I love the TR2. Man, that like just that kind of stuff. It's so subtle, but I love it. But I had to clarify that. I had to clarify the subtleness.
Well, and I think as well, guitar players, if you hear guitar players talk about overdrives, or really any piece of gear for that matter, you know that they're into subtlety. Because some of the differences that people talk about between overdrives, and it's just the way it makes you feel, you know, they sound the same, but this one makes me feel a bit different. Mm-hmm. We are okay with subtle. And that's where I think when it comes to everything past the gain stages, so modulation, delay, reverb, wet effects, that's where maybe some of the subtlety comes back with a bit of a revenge, and it all kind of goes out the window. So I do like the idea of chorus, phaser, flanger, tremolo, even octave, being used in a way that, you know, you're hearing someone play. Maybe it's on a record or something like that, and there's just something, to use the word we're currently in, subtle, but there's a little bit of movement in the back of their tone, and they just have a stereo chorus with very low depth on. And it's just giving them a little bit of almost imperceptible, but it just differentiates or makes it stick out in the mix a little bit more. And you can use modulation effects in a subtle way, absolutely, or a not so subtle way, but you can use them in a subtle way to make your guitar pop in a way that it could not without that modulation effect. And I think that's where there's definitely some validity here. When I'm playing by myself, my modulation effects are typically out of control. I love hearing them, usually because I'm plugging in just that modulation effect to hear it and see, you know, what new settings I can come up with. But I do like the idea of this point, as much trouble as I'm giving it. Mason, how about yourself?
I would say when I use modulation, I don't use it subtly, but I think that it's probably a good piece of advice for most players. One guy that I can remember had a really interesting perspective on modulation is a guitarist named Adam Levy, and he was telling me about how he uses vintage Fender amps and basically just turns the tremolo on to the point where you can barely hear it, but it adds sort of a thickening agent to the sound by kind of having just a slight bit of sort of warble to it.
Yeah.
And another thing I can think of is that a lot of blues guitarists, especially kind of as pedals became more prominent, a lot of the legacy blues guitarists, you know, like the Albert Kings and stuff like that, would sometimes take flangers and turn all the knobs off to like 0, but would just leave them on to, again, try to create just like a little bit of a thickening agent to the sound. And it didn't sound like flange, but it was kind of just like enough to get some movement, or a phaser on 0. It was like just enough where you just had, when you turn it off, you noticed it, that it was gone. And I think that there's merit to that for sure.
And a couple other examples that come to mind of people that use double trackers, slapback delay, I know isn't modulation, but I feel like a slapback delay in a subtle form is almost more like a modulation style effect than it is a delay effect, even though it's delay at the end of the day. But
kind of reverb.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you can do that just ever so slightly elevates your guitar to stick out or poke out in a mix a little bit, and just adds a little bit more interest to it. And I think there's talking about taking your time to find sounds and tones and all this, like this is an area you could spend a lot of time and you could mess around with a lot of different settings trying to see what you like. And this is a cool point. I really liked this one, especially when you hear about like even in what you're just saying here, Mason, about all the knobs turned off on a flanger. I think that was your example. I think there's so many variations here that you could come up with in the modulation realm of effects. And I love it. I think that's great. We are quickly running out of time here though, so let's keep going.
Yeah, maybe we can hit the first 10 and then maybe we do the next 10 for next week, or something like that.
Now, for the gigs that I play, and I know you would look at me and say, yeah, that guy probably just tours around in stadiums, 300 days a year. I do not.
Look at the beard. The beard says it all.
The beard and all my bum notes that I play, right? So I interpreted this point. I would have flipped his example. And the example is dial in settings at gig volume. And
we're not going to do the analog, the number 9, the analog.
Man.
Oh, you missed.
I missed one, didn't I? I scrolled straight, and I really wanted to do that one as well. Let me do number 10, then we'll go back to number 9. So we won't spend long on this one. Dial in settings at gig volume. I would normally think at home, for me at least, I play louder than what I would be allowed to play at the typical pub, smaller style gig. And that's where usually front of house, the sound person is telling you like your guitar's too loud. If you're using a real tube amp on stage, you can never be quiet enough at a gig. That's my experience. And even playing larger rooms that you would have maybe 1,000 seat, place. If the amp is on stage, it can never be too quiet. You'll always be asked to be quieter. And that's where I kind of inverted this one in my mind of gig volume for me would be quieter than when I would be playing at home and just practicing for fun. And either way, I think the point is valid. Dial in settings at a gig volume. I would also add, if you're going to stand up while you're playing, you should also practice standing up at home as well. So your parts and the movement of your hand and all that is also similar to the gig. But what would your experience be in this one? Gigging, Brian, you're going to have to go back a few years here when you used to play with tube amps. I know that might be hard. Dust off the cobwebs here.
It's been a while.
But would you do this practice? Would you set up your gigging rig, or would you just turn on an amp and, set your pedal settings, and then at the gig you kind of make tweaks and adjustments to suit the room?
I don't think I ever practiced at full volume. I mean, my parents would have killed me if I would have practiced that loud. I lived, I guess, in a ghetto neighborhood, and I didn't realize it was ghetto till I moved out. And my neighbors all would have complained. I think I always practiced that low volume. We also would have practices like a midweek practice, which nowadays I don't know how people do midweek practices. Like I would practice at full volume there and stuff, so I didn't typically have to like crank it at home, nor was I able to. But
do you have tinnitus because of it? Practicing at gig volume? I definitely have tinnitus from practicing at full volume.
Well, you mean like the ears ringing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, constantly. I had the ears ringing from when I was in a band, and we would practice in the basement at full volume, which was unreal. And we'd practice till 2:00 because we didn't care. And I don't think I ever did. I think I only would just practice quietly, and then when I got to the place, because at that time I didn't really know what the like do's and don'ts were. I just didn't have a lot of the stuff like this. YouTube wasn't as big with worship tutorials or any of these guys that are come out with videos, podcasts, talking about do's and don'ts and what they do and best practices. Like, I don't think a lot of that stuff was as relevant as it is now or accessible. So I think I just kind of just made it work. And then when I got to wherever I was playing, even in a band, we would get, in a band, you get to the venue, you sound check, but then when you play the show, you turn up louder because that's just how it always is. Like that's what you did.
And the sound guy isn't looking.
And the sound guy isn't looking. But nowadays, when everything is direct, you can't do that because the sound guy's like, haha, sucker, and turns you down and you can't hear anything. So I would say no, not really. I think even when I got to the point where I could run my amp into some kind of headphone thing and silently play, that I would play at really loud volume just so I could feel it, but not like speaker shaking the walls type of level, like nothing like that.
And as the saying goes, the best amps have headphone outs.
Yes,
and remember that.
Remember
that.
That is.
Mason,
that
agree? Disagree?
I think I'm in the camp of no amp should have headphone outs.
I didn't say the amp had headphone out. I meant the extension, like an aux or like a torpedo. Not the amp. No way. That's different.
I don't actually have to make that distinction because here, because I have the speaker cabinet ISO chamber under my house, I generally actually have to be lower in volume because I can run stuff wherever the sweet spot is, and I don't have to worry about it.
Yep.
But usually, I don't play out that often. In the places where I do play, there's usually a backline hot rod deluxe or DeVille. And so usually I'll just bring one pedal like for overdrive and maybe like a few things for like slap back delay and modulation. I don't bring much. So I kind of know how to deal with like a tube screamer through most of those and can dial it quickly. I wouldn't usually bring a pedal board with a bunch of options for overdrive. But I'm definitely playing louder here. And then, obviously I'm listening back through monitors so I can, it's not blistering in the room, but in that if you were, laid down in the little coffin, where all the cabinets are, you'd do some damage for sure. But I think it's, I suppose if you're playing live and you're capable of dialing in those settings, but I would think that if you're playing at home, you're going to have to sort of have your bedroom settings and you're probably going to have your live settings. But I think that the idea behind what this person's saying is you want to know where you're going when you're setting up your sounds, and so it's important to kind of have that distinction. But I don't want to go. I think that's all I have to say. I suppose we should probably get to the last point before we close up about going backwards to point number 9, since we just did point number 10.
Keeping you guys on your toes. Point number 9, try analog. It's often worth it. Now, off the bat, I would say that I agree. Again, there's pros and cons to each option. A digital recreation of an analog effect or the original analog effect itself. But Mason, let's start with you on this one. Your thoughts, analog versus digital.
All right. So I'm looking at the board I have here.
The Nashville board.
Pardon me. My Nashville rig, or even just looking at my blues rig that I'm in the process of building. The only digital pedal on this rig is the M9. I have the M9 going last, and that's kind of the digital multi-effects. On that rig over there that's coming together, I think the only digital thing is there is a Providence chrono delay that is on there. That is digital. And I think there might be a digital reverb under there too, which is I think it's the UA one, the golden. Those are the only digital pedals. Everything else is analog. And then obviously the tube amps are all analog. But, I think it's kind of like one of those things, like you can't escape the digital world. Like even once those are, through amps that are mic'd, it's coming back into the DAW and it's digital again. So I think that, there's no real way for this ecosystem that we're in with YouTube or social media, the sound's all getting converted to digital at some point, and you can have perfect fidelity from A to Z, but the way that people are listening to music for the most part is going to be through some sort of digital medium. So it's somewhat inescapable. And my thought is to the degree that it works for you and inspires you to play, do it. For me, I love the sound of a tube amp and I love the sound of analog overdrive pedals. I don't mind using digital pedals in my rig, and I think I can get them to sound great, and many people have gotten them to sound great. So I don't weigh them against the merit of some sort of like, I don't know, pretend metric. I just look at it from the standpoint of, does it sound good? Am I using it in a way where it's pleasing to me and enjoying to play? And if the answer to that is yes, then that digital pedal makes the cut. And I think for the most part, the digital pedals are as good or better as they've ever been. And I'm happy to use digital delays and reverbs and stuff like that. I don't have any issue whatsoever.
Brian, you admittedly use a lot of digital effects. One of the favorites, the Quad Cortex and Nano Cortex. What's your take on this point in the last couple minutes we have here?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I have a Fractal and Axe FX 3, the Quad Cortex and Nano Cortex. So I have a plethora of digital at the moment. And I think they're great. Funny enough is I stay away from digital overdrives when they're single pedals. I don't know why. There's something I just have never liked, which is kind of weird because the fact that I like the Quad Cortex and the Axe Effects digital drives that they have in it, they just respond differently. I don't know, maybe just because
it's a subtlety thing.
Yeah, it's the Quad Cortex. A lot of the stuff were captures, so they were analog pedals that were captured. So that might be some of it for the Quad. Obviously, the Axe Effects stuff is just what comes on it, but they just did a really good job. I had more of a trouble with like stuff with like the Riverside and the Sunset from Strymon. Just really trying to get those to not sound so brittle and harsh in digital. Some people can do really great. I think it really depends. But like, yeah, digital, like modulation, delay, reverb, there's multiple effects, the plethora, TC electronic pedal, like that kind of stuff it just comes in real handy. It comes in handy for stuff when you don't always need that effect. So having an M5 or having an H9 or H90 that can do all sorts of different tones for that gig, especially if you have a MIDI controller, you can pull up that POG sound for that one song you do once a year or once a set or something, but then it can go back to whatever. It can go back to a boost. So I think having a digital, yeah, I think it's great. I think, you're only capping your ability to get the sounds you want if you're like, I'm only doing analog everything. Then I think it just, there's no harm in it. Some people, it's just what they like, and that's fine. But I think that digital stuff is really good. That's it for me.
As I always try and do when I'm trying to explain something with an analogy, I go to maple syrup. And I feel like the digital world, when it comes to some effects, talking about the DC2W, the Dimension C by Boss, the analog circuit, that is the real maple syrup. The recreations are still good, but they're Aunt Jemima's. They're maple flavored syrup. And I just don't... it's hard for me if I'm just going for strictly the sound of the effect. I'm not looking for more MIDI control. I'm not looking for expression necessarily or external tap tempo or presets. If I'm just going for the quality of the effect, I find it very hard to pass up the analog circuit. Same with analog delay. Like the Quad Cortex has some great analog delays in it. But if you were to hand me, like pull up an analog delay sound and you were to hand me a digital recreation or a DM2, I'm going to pick the DM2 because it has all of the analog delay qualities, the nuance, the quirks, the artifacts that are very, very hard, if not impossible, to perfectly replicate. And if we're going for inspiration, I want to keep playing my guitar and I need an analog delay sound, I'm going to go for the real thing. That is not to hate on the digital recreations, again, because they are these days necessary. You have to have them, especially if you're touring, doing song lists, sets, presets, all that. It's very hard to escape. And I'm so happy that we have them. But if I'm just sitting down like I often do, and I'll just play guitar through, I'll pick one pedal to play through, often modulation actually, then I'd always just grab the analog signal path. And I love it, and I get lost in it. And I think that's where I'm typically picking the real maple syrup, and unless I have to factor in other considerations.
Yeah.
And so, It's a balance. It's a hard thing to find. But that being said, if I needed to play a Sunday service, or I needed to go on tour or anything like that, I am not grabbing the DM2. I am grabbing a timeline, or I'm grabbing something that emulates that, because it brings with it all these other pros, ease of use that you just can't get with some of these true analog circuits. So that being said, we have reached the end of our time together today. We are going to keep driving towards Stonetown, slowly making our way. It's been, coming up on, has it been over 3 years now? And we still haven't actually arrived at Stonetown. I was told this journey would be a lot quicker, but here we are.
Slow journey.
But worth it. Well worth it. And so thank you guys for your insight, your experience. Thank you, listener, for joining us and joining us on our Facebook group, Chairmen of the Boards, on Facebook, Instagram page. And if you are listening but would rather watch, you can also find us, Chairmen of the Boards, on YouTube if you prefer the video version. So thanks again, guys. We will see you next week, same time, same place, for another episode on Chairmen of the Boards. See you later.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.